This meeting of Norwood City Council is hereby called to order. Please rise for the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, as the body we congregate in these council chambers. We pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome back, everyone. This is normally where we have a moment of silence for people, but thankfully we don't have a moment of silence, but I would like to wish well a member of someone who is always at our meetings, and that is Ginny Wallace. And so if Ginny, if you are watching, I expect that you will be back with us and keeping us on track and raising Cain very soon. So if you will keep Ginny Wallace and her family in your prayers, I appreciate that. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo. Here. Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Ms. Stevenson.
Present.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes, here.
Mr. Sanker.
Here.
Mr. Breeden.
Here.
All members are present. We have several requests to amend the agenda. The first is to remove communication number 2, the letter from Chief Wallace regarding fire department activities. That is just for council's information. It's not for the agenda. But we would like to replace it with a memo that I just received this evening that I made a copy and put on your desk, and that is a letter from Jerry Stoker to Mayor Williams regarding a CRA agreement for William DeLuca commercial property. So we would replace communication 2 with that. And then to add the Finance Committee report as the 4th report under reports of standing committees of council. Those are the requests. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that we make the changes that were stated.
Seconded by Mr. Sanker. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please. I'm sorry, Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you. Could you repeat what was the last amendment to the agenda?
We were adding a Finance Committee report under the standing committees of council regarding the change in appropriations.
Thank you.
So three things: remove communication 2 from the Chief Wallace, add the communication from Jerry Stoker to Mayor Williams regarding a CRA agreement, and then adding the Finance Committee report under number 4 of reports of standing committees. Is there any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next, we have the minutes of the July 10th, 2018 meeting, and they were distributed prior by email. Mr. Clark,
Move to approve the minutes as I've read.
seconded by Mrs. Hannerhan. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We'll move on. We do have 2 requests to address the council, but they are not on agenda items, so we will deal with those a little later on. Reports of standing committees of council. The first is the Committee of the Whole regarding Market Garden, dated July the 23rd, 2018, to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio. We, your Committee of the Whole, to whom was referred Market Garden request for zone change, beg leave to submit the following report. Council heard from Mr. Stoker as to why the Planning Commission rejected the zone change request. Greg Orras regarding his background work on market gardens in other communities. Mark Reeves regarding current housing conversions from multifamily to single family with rising housing values. And Dr. Oldfield regarding advantages to market gardens. Council asks that the Law Department speak to the issue at the next council meeting. Respectfully submitted, Donna Lake, Chairperson, Mr. Bonsall, Mr. Clark, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Stevenson, Mrs. Hannerhan, Mr. Sanker. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the committee report be received and filed.
Seconded by Mrs. Hannerhan. Is there any discussion? Ms. Stevenson.
I'd like to invite the law director to comment.
Yeah, my guess is you were probably never notified of this.
Thank you, Madam President. That's correct. I actually don't have a copy of the committee report in my packet. So
Yeah, it was not included in the packet. I did notice that. I just got into town very early this morning. Noticed it wasn't in the packet. So could we maybe at the next council meeting?
Maybe some guidance as to what, it's a question of whether council wants to move forward with setting that up as a possible use, and then what conditions, if any, make it a conditional use, and what districts it would be in. That would be those are the main issues.
Ms. Stevenson?
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
It's a question of what, I'm not sure what comments I would have on it. My real comments would be would be questions to councils. Which districts would council want to permit that as a use? Would it be a permitted use? Would it be a conditional use? If it was a conditional use, under what conditions? And it would be that kind of thing. What's the structure that council wants? If there's any other limitations, there's a variety of ways to go. And so that would be my question: is what do you want the zoning code to allow and not allow?
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I do have a couple comments and questions. As I think back on the conversation, I think it was new to this council member, to understand that defining the structure was in our purview. And so as a non-expert in zoning and the implications, I was looking for legal counsel on what resources are available in the administration versus what we might need to find outside of the administration to put together criteria to govern the structure if it were approved, the structure being Market Gardens. I also was looking for guidance on implementation, since a recommendation was made to council that council wanted to further discuss and maybe not even accept. At what point in time does council take vote, and then how does that impact our current zoning board? Those are some of the things that I was looking for legal counsel on.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President.
Are we we're not under any time constraints to act on recommendations?
I don't believe so.
I don't believe so either, but I'm...
And so it's, as far as how it's administered, it depends on what it is that you want to put in place. If you want to allow market gardens defined in particular ways, yes, you can have agricultural uses that, use up this much of this percentage of the land. You can't use tractors over this size. Those kinds of definitions. If that's allowed as a permitted use, then it's just they come down and get a zoning permit, just like you would if you're going to build a single-family home in an R1. If you're going to make it a conditional use, then anybody that wants to do it would have to go to the zoning board. Basically, they go to the zoning board and say, I would like you to permit this, and the zoning board would then say, okay, does it meet these requirements that are spelled out in the ordinance? And we would also like to add, and they can add other provisions. They could say, okay, but you can only use half the land, or if you do it, you have to have this kind of a landscape buffer, or there's any number of conditions almost any number of conditions they could put on that. As far as the resources of people that know about it, I think everybody that actually knows anything about this within the city was at the meeting, at the committee of the whole meeting, because I really know very, very little about market gardens as a general principle.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any other discussion? Ms. Stevenson?
I just want to paraphrase what I heard. So it sounds like if when council revisits market gardens, we could define use of land and the percentage of the use of land, we would in fact develop an ordinance that would create criteria that is then used by the Board of Zoning Appeals if an application for a defined market garden were to come before them again.
Mr. Moore?
That's correct. And there I think that was there were, I think, a couple of different alternatives presented as part of the owner's or the proposed owner's application to the zoning board, to the planning commission to create this zone. Is that there was some text said, okay, we would like to make this a permitted use and spelled out definitions of various things, or as a conditional use and spelled out various conditions on that. And I'm sure Mr. Oros presented, I think he helped put together some ideas on that. I think he's got some text that would be used, that would be a place to start anywhere.
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Any other discussion? Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, so I think we left that meeting kind of where we are now, not really knowing where we go forward. I think it probably warrants another committee of the whole where we could come with ideas on how we would structure an ordinance to do this, these conditions that Law Director referred to, if that is in fact what council wishes to do.
I was going to say, I'm not certain that we came to that conclusion at the meeting. There was just
Right.
general discussion about how to proceed. Either you use it as a permitted use, or then the possibility of a conditional use came up. And, you know, certainly something to look at is in different areas. Do you want to use it in residential areas, or you want it in other commercial areas, or industrial, or whatever? There's certainly a lot of issues that are involved. Yes, Mr. Johnson?
Right. And point being is there's still further discussion that needs to be had.
I don't think we're anywhere near an ordinance yet.
Right.
At least that was kind of the opinion I got after leaving that committee of the whole meeting.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure that we weren't under any, I didn't think we were under any time constraints, just to make sure that we did it right and researched. Mrs. Hanrahan, did you have a comment?
I did, but it was pretty much answered. I just wanted to make sure that we understood, or that I understood correctly. We have to decide where we want to go with it before we make stipulations and structures and start working on an ordinance. And that was going to be my only comment.
So if you think later on there's enough to have another committee of the whole, maybe we could discuss that later on in the meeting. If you think there's enough, if we've gathered enough information, or if you just want to meet to see where you want to go with it. Right now, the motion on the floor is just to receive and file the committee of the whole report. Any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Abstain.
6 out of the 7 members voted yes and 1 abstention. Motion passes. Next is the Parks, Recreation, Streets, and Infrastructure regarding Waterworks Park basketball hoops and Adopt a Park. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honorable Council and City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Parks, Recreation, Streets, and Infrastructure, beg leave to submit the following report. This was July 11th. President of Council Donna Lake and Lieutenant Ron Murphy attended the committee meeting to discuss Waterworks Parks basketball hoops and the Adopt a Park process. That day, the mayor let us know that we would be allowed to put up basketball hoops at Waterworks Park. Lieutenant Murphy was there to address some of the safety concerns with the particular space that we want to do the basketball hoops. We left with the next steps, looking at determining costs of putting in the hoops and finding funding for those hoops. We also discussed our progress on our Adopt a Park packet and process. Current packet's been submitted to legal for review. I know that they've gotten back and it's very close to being done. Our next steps, probably at our next meeting, will be finalizing it and determining the best way in which to implement it.
I've had several people reach out to me about doing projects already, so.
Right, there's excitement about it, which
Yes,
is pretty
yes.
cool. Not noted on here, but I should have. We also talked about developing kind of a wish list for our parks, and so when people or organizations do volunteer, but they might not know exactly what they want to volunteer for, we can have some guidance to give them. So that kind of wraps up in that.
Which pleasure. Mr. Clark,
Move that the committee report be accepted.
seconded by Mr. Bonsall. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Hanrahan.
Thank you, Madam President. I would just like to add, this is the time, if you're a parent or just a resident, and there's something on that wish list you would like to see at a park, to feel free to let us know, any of the council people, and we can move it on to that committee.
Yeah, do you want to read who was at the meeting, signed by?
Oh, the meeting was just Ms. Hanrahan and myself.
Okay. Any other discussion? Ms. Stevenson?
Yes, I just want to build on what Mrs. Hanrahan shared, because later this month, the action groups of the quality of life visioning planning process are going to meet. And there is a group that's looking at parks as well. And so I'm hopeful they'll respond and share some of their ideas and maybe even address your committee as well.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Discuss nothing's worse than having somebody agree to adopt a park and what do you need? And you say, well, we'll get back to you on that. So there's plenty of stuff. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is an economic development and community engagement report regarding committee goals. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, we, your Committee of Economic Development and Community Engagement, to whom it was referred our goals, beg leave to submit the following. Number 1, welcome to Norwood. Committee members recommend a welcome bag modeled after local examples. We have drafted a letter seeking partnership with the Norwood Chamber of Commerce, which is attached for council's review. The concept would require a bag be sponsored, information about the city and promotional materials from local businesses be included. A parallel welcome experience is recommended for the city's website too. As council considers the submission and adoption of this report, I'd ask that you consider authorizing the sending of the letter that's attached as well. Number 2, small business in Norwood. Committee members have requested Greg Ora's research the requirements for and criteria to apply for an entertainment district. At our next meeting, we anticipate sharing publicly about efforts to identify resources for business development and revitalization on the Montgomery Road corridor. Some of this work will be a complement to ideas residents have put forth in the quality of life visioning planning process. Number 3. Neighborhood associations in Norwood. Committee members recommend council invite action groups to appropriate council meetings and that we provide the action groups with the standing committees and contact information for each chairperson. Number 4, community engagement in Norwood. Councilmember Stevenson was approached by a resident about the process of creating murals in Norwood. The committee will keep the topic in discussion and has invited Artworks to share about their process of working with the City of Cincinnati at the September 6th committee meeting. Since drafting the minutes, I can report out that Artworks will be in attendance. The committee will continue to discuss how to best educate the public on the role of the Board of Zoning Appeals and the application of our sign code. Greg Oros will draft a definition of mural and recommendations for zoning districts. Also under number 4, Councilmember Stevenson has been hosting a table at the Norwood Farmers Market for resident groups to share about upcoming events. Any Norwood-based group that would like to share information can drop off flyers to the Clerk of Council's office Monday through Friday, 9 to 3. Or can plan to be present at the booth during the Farmers Market, which is fourth Saturdays from 9 to noon at Williams and Ellesmere. Number 5, quality of life in Norwood. Committee members recommend residents take part in action groups that will meet beginning Wednesday, August 29th from 7 to 9 p.m. at Norwood High School. Residents will lead groups to plan in the following areas: community perception, inclusion, economic development, infrastructure, housing, and community engagement. Community engagement includes activities in the parks, which is what I referenced earlier. The Community Building Institute at Xavier University, in partnership with the United Way, will provide technical assistance to compile information from American Community Survey, the U.S. Census, My Sidewalk, and other resources to support the action group's planning process. Council members are encouraged to utilize that data and request presentations of data CBI is collecting as well. Questions about this report or this committee can be directed to myself. My email is lstephenson@norwood-ohio.com, or messages can be left at the Clerk of Council office.
And it's signed by?
Yes, it is. Signed by myself. It's signed by Mr. Bonsall, Mr. Thompson, and Mr. Breeden. Thank you.
Thank you. What's your pleasure? Mr. Braden?
I'd like to request that the committee report be received and filed.
And authorize sending of the letter?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. To be clear, Ms. Stevenson, will you be sending the letter, or do you want the clerk of council? I don't want that to slip through. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. I would prefer that the clerk of council send the letter on our committee's behalf.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Next is the Finance Committee report regarding change in appropriations. Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. So to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Finance, Budget, and Audit, to whom is referred, request to change appropriations and capital improvements plan. Beg leave to submit the following report. We recommend consideration of the ordinance to change appropriations on the agenda tonight to allow the city to better plan funding of our police department. We also recommend the city advertise for bids to repave Section Avenue between Ross Avenue and the Corporation Line. Respectfully submitted, James Bonsall, Andrew Clark, John Breeden, Leslie Stevenson.
Mr. Braden?
I would request the committee report be received and filed.
Seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? Have you discussed the funding for Section Avenue with the Anna Mary? You may want to clarify that for the public.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. So we can fund, so basically we don't have the appropriations in place to spend money out of our street fund. Even though there are funds in our street fund there, we have to change the plan to say that we're going to spend them. But in the meantime, while that will happen, we can advertise for bids. We just can't sign the bids. So the Safety Service Director can work on just gathering information, getting the documentation ready, even advertising the bids while we're simultaneously working on getting the appropriations there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Hi. I know we had previously talked about having an audit done or another list of what streets were the worst and how did you come up with Section Avenue as being the street to be repaved?
Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. It was a recommendation from the City Administration.
And I believe the City of Cincinnati paved their half of it, just like they did Cypress Way. So I always try to drive on the Cincinnati side of Cypress Way. And I think Section is the same way, where Cincinnati repaved their half, but not ours.
Yeah, it's kind of hard on that one to drive on the Cincinnati side if you're going up it.
Is there any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to receive and file the committee report. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We'll move on. We have no second or third reading of ordinances or resolutions, so we'll move on to introductory readings of ordinances. The first is an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the purchase of 2,000 tons more or less of salt at bulk rate and declaring an emergency. This is part of the financial recovery plan, and monies have been appropriated, and that was confirmed today by me with Anna Mary. Mr. Sanker.
I'd recommend we have all three readings, please.
Seconded by Mrs. Hanahan. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all three readings.
Ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the purchase of 2,000 tons more or less of salt at a bulk rate and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the purchase of 2,000 tons more or less of salt at a bulk rate and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the purchase of 2,000 tons more or less of salt at a bulk rate and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Clark,
Move to pass the ordinance.
seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvement and/or Local Transportation Improvements Program, and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. I did have the discussion with Anna Mary, and before, this is the same Ohio Public Works street resurfacing program that Mr. Gears has been very successful in obtaining over the years. If we get this, then there would be an ordinance that would come back, and we would execute that and have to appropriate funds for that. Sometimes we're able to use our community development block grant funds for that, depending on where it is. Mr. Sanker.
Yes, Madam President, this actually just gives us the opportunity to be part of that program.
Correct.
And then we would have to, as you said, submit different areas that would fit the economic criteria, and to see if there would be something that would qualify this year. And but without this, we're not even allowed to, wouldn't be able to apply for any of that money that's out there.
Correct.
This is the first step.
Right. And hopefully we'll be back
Yeah.
accepting it and appropriating money. So what's your pleasure with this? Mr. Clark?
Move that we suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of this ordinance.
Seconded by Mrs. Hanrahan. Is there any discussion? Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. Just a point of clarity. So the State Capital Improvement Program and the Local Transportation Improvement Program, just so I want to clarify, these are not actual capital improvement plans. These are just programs that would facilitate projects.
Correct.
Thank you.
That is correct. Williams Avenue was done with the Ohio Public Works Commission grant. So those types of projects. Any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzal.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings.
Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvement and/or Local Transportation Improvement Programs, and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvement and/or Local Transportation Improvement Programs, and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvement and/or Local Transportation Improvement Programs, and to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the ordinance be passed.
Seconded by Mrs. Hanrahan. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzal.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety to enter into a lease agreement between the Board of County Commissioners, Hamilton County, Ohio, and the City of Norwood on behalf of the Norwood Police Department for mobile data computers, MDCs, and docking stations, and declaring an emergency. I again had a discussion with Anna Mary. These are the computers and the docking stations that are in the police cruisers, not to be confused with the conversation we had about dispatch. So these are actually in cruiser computers. There is the reference to a lease, which is considered debt and would have to be approved by the Financial Planning and Supervision Commission. However, upon further review, it was learned that lease is a term that the county is using. And so Anna Mary and April Davis both feel that we can proceed. It is in the financial recovery plan. It would not be considered new debt because it is in the financial recovery plan, and so we are free to move forward with that information I give to you today. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I would move that we have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
Seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? Mr. Sanker?
Yes, Madam President, I believe also that this is an upfront lease. So the lease, basically you're buying them, except we never own them. The county always owns them. That way, in the event that they make a change to any of the systems that this pertains to now, if the county changes, we don't own this equipment and we're not stuck with obsolete equipment. That's why it's a lease, and it's, if the county makes a change, it affords us the opportunity to get in on the change through the lease. So.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Sanker. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. And the reason why we need to do all 3 readings is because they are needing to move forward with getting this done. So we approved it in our appropriations quite a while ago. So not sure why we're just not getting it, but either way, they need it pretty quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to suspend the rules. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings.
Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety to enter into a lease agreement between the Board of County Commissioners, Hamilton County, Ohio, and the City of Norwood on behalf of the Norwood Police Department for mobile data computers, MDCs, and docking stations, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety to enter into a lease agreement between the Board of County Commissioners, Hamilton County, Ohio, and the City of Norwood on behalf of the Norwood Police Department for mobile data computers, MDCs, and docking stations, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety to enter into a lease agreement between the Board of County Commissioners, Hamilton County, Ohio, and the City of Norwood on behalf of the Norwood Police Department for mobile data computers, MDCs, and docking stations, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the ordinance be passed.
Seconded by Mr. Breeden. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. Just following up on Mr. Sanker's comment, I mean, these computers are used by, I'm pretty sure every department in the county has the exact same type of computers, and they're all unified so that there can be just one group at the county that manages all the systems that we talked about and all the stuff in place. So that's kind of why we're leasing them and not just like going out and buying our own. It's better to have the experts running them, and we're able to use their technology.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to pass the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is an ordinance promoting the citywide street sale September 7th and 8th, 2018, and abating all permit fees associated with the sale. Mr. Sanker?
Madam President, I would recommend we have at least the first reading in its entirety, and the other 2 by caption only.
Okay, the first sentence, and yeah, there is no emergency clause, so we kind of need to get this passed so they can abate the fees. So you want it the first time in its entirety and the second time by caption?
Yes, ma'am.
Second and third time by caption. Is there a second by Mr. Breeden? Discussion. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. You're up.
Ordinance promoting the citywide street sale September 7th and 8th, 2018, and abating all permit fees associated with the sale. Whereas council desires to promote a semi-annual citywide street sale to be held on Friday, September 7th, 2018, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Saturday, September 8th, 2018, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and to have all permit fees associated with the sale abated. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Norwood, State of Ohio, that Section 1, the City of Norwood will have a citywide street sale on Friday, September 7th, 2018, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Saturday, September 8th, 2018, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Section 2, Council for the City of Norwood hereby directs the Clerk of Council to advertise the citywide street sale by postings throughout the city and on Norwood Cable Television in order to notify residents of this event. Section 3, Norwood City Council hereby authorizes the abatement of all permit fees associated with the citywide street sale in order to promote participation in this semi-annual event. Section 4, the city will prepare a directory showing the location of all sellers in the citywide street sale. Section 5, street sale sellers who obtain their permits 7 days prior to the citywide street sale will have their addresses included in a city directory of street sale locations. This does not prevent participants from obtaining a permit after the 7-day deadline, but sellers who miss the deadline will not be included in the directory. Section 6, Council for the City of Norwood hereby authorizes each resident to have a yard sale in the front yard, side yard, and/or backyard on Friday, September 7th, 2018 from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Saturday, September 8th, 2018 from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Section 7, there will be no rain-out dates scheduled to replace September 7th and 8th, 2018. Section 8, no home sale/street sale shall be conducted by the same resident or member of his or her family and/or the same residential property more than twice in the 12-month period. Section 9, no home sale shall offer any merchandise for sale that has been purchased by the resident for purposes of resale at such home sale. Any new merchandise offered for sale shall be prima facie evidence of merchandise purchased by the resident for resale at such home sale. Section 10, whoever violates or fails to comply with any provision of this ordinance shall be guilty of a minor misdemeanor. Ordinance promoting the citywide street sale September 7th and 8th, 2018, and abating all permit fees associated with the sale. Ordinance promoting the citywide street sale September 7th and 8th, 2018, and abating all permit fees associated with the sale.
Mr. Clark,
Move to pass the ordinance.
please. Yeah, he did by caption. Sorry, seconded by Mr. Thompson. Is there any discussion? Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to clarify, is the directory posted on the city website?
Yes.
I think it's on the city website, and I think people can pick up copies of it, if I'm not mistaken, in the treasurer's office or auditor's office, wherever they apply for the permit. But it is on the city's website. Yes, Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. My second question, just a point of clarity, is the 9 to 5, does that include setup and tear down time, or can residents set up before 9 to be ready to sell it?
You can set up before 9. Sales are from 9 to 5.
Okay.
Other people just knock on your door at quarter till 8 in the morning or whatever when you're setting up.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to pass the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is an ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2018 and declaring an emergency, and your attachment is on your desks. The Exhibit A. Mr. Clark,
Move that we suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of this ordinance.
seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2018 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2018 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2018 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Clark,
Move to pass the ordinance.
seconded by Mr. Braden. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. So this ordinance just helps us to fund a audit of the police department that we need to have. From my understanding, there really hasn't been anything, at least anything recently, where we're able to understand information about the equipment that we're using, about the number of people that we have. Do we have too few? Do we have too many? About even the police cruisers themselves, just knowing that are we way out of standard with the way that ours are operating. So just looking forward to getting more information, and this audit, when it's completed, eventually it will be public, so we'll be able to have a copy that we can distribute to residents so they can understand kind of how things work. So.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to pass the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We'll move on to introductory readings of resolutions, and this is a resolution recognizing and thanking Tri-Health. We did invite someone from Tri-Health to be present, but obviously they were not able to attend, so we'll go ahead and proceed with consideration of this resolution. Mr. Sanker?
Yes, Madam President, and again, on this, I would like to have all three readings, the first one in its entirety, and the second and third by caption, please.
Seconded by Mr. Bonsall. Is there any discussion? Ms. Stevenson?
I'd like to ask council to consider, would it be worth holding until a member can be present when we do resolve this acknowledgement?
I think, to answer your question, I think actually the law department questioned whether we should even have the resolution because the city already sent a letter and thanked them. I suggested that we go ahead and proceed with this since it was a motion of council to have the resolution, and I like to pay attention to what you all say that you want to do. And so I asked them to go ahead and proceed with the resolution. So perhaps it was that they had already been thanked, that they felt like they didn't need to be here.
So as a follow-up, if I
Yes.
may, was the language in the fourth whereas citing thanks from council included in the letter that administration sent?
I'm not certain. I did not see that, so I am not certain of that. I couldn't answer. My guess is probably the mayor just thanked them for all the different pieces of furniture, but that's only a guess. I did not see the letter. Is there any other discussion? Mrs. Hanahan?
Thank you, Madam President. I would just like to personally thank them again because I appreciate my new chair. It's not going to break on me.
Thank you, duly noted. Any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is to suspend the rules to have the first reading in its entirety and second and third by caption. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all three readings.
Resolution recognizing and thanking Tri-Health. Whereas in the process of expanding and relocating employees and services to the city of Norwood, Tri-Health donated approximately 60% of its furniture and office equipment to outside organizations, and whereas Tri-Health contacted the city of Norwood to inquire as to whether the city would like any of the furniture or equipment before it was donated to someone else or discarded, and whereas the chairs in council chambers and throughout City Hall have been in dire need of replacement for years, if not decades, and whereas, thanks to Tri-Health's generous offer, there is significant improvement to the Norwood City Council chambers, Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, Mayor's Court, Community, Senior Center, and other departments. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Norwood, State of Ohio, that the Council thanks Tri-Health for its kindness, its good corporate citizenship, and its in-kind donations. Resolution recognizing and thanking Tri-Health. Resolution recognizing and thanking Tri-Health.
Mr. Breeden?
I would like to make a recommendation that the resolution be passed.
Seconded by Mr. Bonsall. Is there any discussion? We will make sure that the original gets sent to Tri-Health. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We have no administration reports. We do have two requests to address council. The first is Amy Wolfenbarger regarding Norwood cannabis ordinance and Get Out the Vote campaign. If you'd like to come forward, give us your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes to address council.
Amy Wolfenbarger, 5406 Carthage Avenue. I would like to thank council for allowing me to address you all tonight. As many of you know, some of you don't, I'm the founder of Sensible Norwood. We're a citizen-led group working to change cannabis laws on local level in the city of Norwood. I've written an initiative to remove the fines and jail penalties for low-level, nonviolent cannabis possession charges of less than 200 grams. We began our signature gathering campaign on May the 8th. We have received a lot of support from Norwood citizens. I have in my folder here 646 signatures that we have submitted. Signatures have been sent to Hamilton County Board of Elections. They have been validated, and we have exceeded the amount required for ballot placement for November election. Currently, we are waiting for our issue number to be received, which should happen sometime, I would say, like the second week of September or so. A little bit about our initiative also, I would like to just let everybody know that this is not legalization in any form. We cannot go outside of Ohio law when we write local ballot initiative. So like I said, basically what we're doing is we are just removing the fines for low-level, non-violent cannabis possession. So much like a city can raise or lower the fines for littering or a speeding ticket, a city can also lower fines for cannabis possession. So that's what we're seeking to do. As of now, we, like I said, will be on the ballot in November. Once we receive our issue number, we will be running a very strong Get Out the Vote campaign. We are experienced in running cannabis reform campaigns throughout the state of Ohio. Having said that, I just wanted to talk just a little bit. I really don't want to make a big deal about it, but I would like to discuss a little bit about an incident that occurred on July 23rd with a Norwood police officer. We had a representative of my organization detained in a police cruiser handcuffed for over an hour. The representative was door knocking for signatures. My understanding of what happened was a resident accused him of soliciting. He tried to explain to the resident that we were not soliciting, nor what definition of soliciting has to be a transfer of money, services, goods, etc. He continued on to the next door. The resident chose to call the Norwood Police Department. Norwood Police Department responded, and the officer, who I don't want to really say his name out of respect for our police department, but the officer did, like I say, handcuff him, detain him in the back of a police cruiser for over an hour. Upon release of my representative, he was issued a ticket for obstruction of justice, which under Norwood Code is a second-degree misdemeanor. I did reach out to Councilman Bonzel, who notified, I believe, either Chief Kramer or Lieutenant Murphy, maybe both, and I think maybe the Assistant Law Director. At the end of the day, the charges were dismissed prior to court hearing. I'm appreciative of that. I'm appreciative of the help that I received from Councilman Bonzel. I did request per public records a copy of body cam footage and any audio tapes or anything that might have been on file for this. I have not received them. I am assuming that it's due to the case that, the fact the case was dismissed, and that's fine. I just want to ask council that while we are doing the Get Out the Vote portion of our campaign, I may not be in the proper place to ask this, but I would like to ensure that our group, depending upon whatever side of the fence you're on, the law is the law. And I would like to request that council ensure that none of our representatives have to encounter this again. I would have been happy to have shared this footage with each council member to show that my representative was not inappropriate in any way had I have gotten it. As I said, I did not, and like I said, to me it's not that big of a deal. I don't know if any of y'all have any questions, but basically that's why I'm here tonight, to just kind of introduce the ordinance and then ask that we would receive the same respect that any politician would receive while going door to door. We are a political campaign. We have a political action committee. We're filed with the Hamilton County Board of Elections. So, thank you all for allowing me to be here tonight, and I appreciate your time and attention.
Questions? Mrs. Hannerham?
Do you have a copy of the initiative you want to have put on the ballot?
I do have a copy. I've sent PDFs to some council members that I've spoken with. I have a limited amount left. I think I have 9. I would like to keep 2 for
If you
my
could just
little
leave one with us,
scrapbook,
we can make copies if that's okay.
Perfect.
And as a personal suggestion, I would find that the police department are very willing to speak to people, and perhaps you could sit down with Lieutenant Murphy and let him know about your Get Out the Vote campaign, and he can let the police department know. They've been very respectful and very good about that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is the first time we've ever had an issue. We have encountered issues with residents before who don't like what we're doing. There have been times that we have requested that resident call the police, because typically what we find is that the police know the law and generally there's no problem. For whatever reason, this time there was an incident, and like I said, I don't fully understand it. I do have a copy of the ticket. I have extras I'm happy to share, but like I said, out of respect, I don't want to...
No, I think that's fine.
Okay.
I don't have to share that. Thank you. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. And, really the thanks goes to Tim Gary, Assistant Law Director. After multiple consultations with the police department, he basically, from my understanding, he recommended to them that he just can't defend that ticket in court. And so I'm appreciative that things worked out in the end so that the gentleman didn't have to come down from where he originally was from. And we just have to remember too that could be any one of us could be out for whatever political reason that we were out there. So it's and that's exactly actually what Tim Gary said as well. And so we don't want anybody detained for political activity, especially not given an obstruction of justice. And I don't know the full story about everything that happened on the background, but I am happy that the resolution kind of came to be. And I also would say, I think Lieutenant Murphy has been on vacation for a couple of weeks, so it could be that that's why you haven't received it, but even if the ticket was dropped, you're definitely entitled to receive the body cam footage. So you can always send a reminder to them or reach out to them, but I'm sure they'd be happy to meet with you. And I do agree with Mrs. Lake as well, that it might be good just to let Ron Murphy or Chief Kramer know kind of what to expect in the next few months just from your campaigns.
Okay.
You shouldn't have to, but just in case.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Oh, Ms. Stevenson.
Not a question, but I just wanted to say thank you for bringing this to our attention, and thank you for your work.
Great, thank you, and thanks again for allowing me to address council tonight. And I would like to thank Mr. Gary as well as Mr. Bonsall and Lieutenant Murphy and Chief Kramer for taking care of this, so my representative didn't have to come all the way down from Toledo to attend court. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Pastor Sonny James regarding community. If you'll give us your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Greetings, Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue, here in Norwood.
He looks at me.
I, in respect to an agreement that I've been issued and accept, I want to address some serious issues, but I want to do so as positively as I can. At the same time, these are issues that trouble me. First of all, I was addressed when I came in this evening if my next year's candidacy endorsements were ready, and I answered the individual, not yet. But I do want to say in all fairness that out of respect for each of you who serve Norwood, this has been, in my personal opinion, a very interesting and well put together group, much more so in my opinion that has gathered in previous years. Not that everything is perfect, but then again, who is perfect, right? But one of the things that I have to address is when we talk about secret societies, people say often, well, where do you get that nonsense from? How do you come out and challenge us? I want to just say for the record, the challenges that I have made to date, there hasn't been one individual in our entire city that could come up and say, Pastor James, you lied, or you intentionally manipulated the story, or whatever. So I encourage, as I do make these challenges in a positive way, I do encourage you to look into them. Some of which would be, as it was mentioned earlier, how a police incident was resolved. Well, on one of our, not too long ago, holidays, another police incident happened. And as most of you know, I'm going to go right to the top. I even addressed a council person to try to intervene and get help. And yet tonight we hear that, oh, I'm sure folks will talk to you. Well, I got an email that said, oh, I thought the matter was resolved. Well, how do we resolve a matter and there's no dialogue? So we still have areas where we can grow. I want to address the fact that 3 years ago, I gave a 13-point plan for the city. Of course, we didn't want to adopt what Pastor James presented, but of course, once we go into fiscal emergency, some of those same areas are addressed, and guess what? Even though it's tough, we address them. What I'm encouraging us to do as a city is to not just adopt things and to implement them as long as it's being presented by people that we endorse or people that we support. We need to learn to be transparent. And as all of these action groups, which on the 13-point plan was one of those, and I'm sure certain members gathered that 13-point plan, and as opposed to contacting those of us who have years of experience from the East Coast to the West Coast, we would rather appoint and find somebody who has absolutely no history and record of even accomplishing anything in that area. We would rather do that than to embrace everyone in the community if there's a reputation, like some of us, that maybe we don't always agree. I want us to be more transparent. And all of these action groups that are concerned about the quality of life in Norwood, you can't make changes without making changes. Look at what we're going through as a city. Fiscal emergency. And guess what's happening? Changes are happening. No one can refute that. But if we don't make more changes, changes aren't going to happen. And real quick, I'll give you an example. When we talked about for years basketball hoops in Norwood, well, I have an issue simply because I thought we took away the basketball hoops because of the illicit drug activity. Well, drug use hasn't decreased. So now how is it all of a sudden individuals that have no contact with the element that caused the rumor of drug use, we're now going to formulate a group of those same individuals that don't deal with that element to now authorize basketball. As you know, I've been a big supporter of basketball, and we've traveled young people clear across the city so they can play. But you cannot say on one end that because of drug activity and a certain element that basketball hoops are taken away, and now we turn around and tell the same residents, oh, guess what? Now we're going to bring basketball hoops back. Are you going to monitor them? I would venture to say who's ever involved won't even address the element that you say caused you to take the hoops away in the first place. Make up our minds. What I'm proposing is we do need more citizen-led action groups, but let's make it more embracive, inclusive, and let's make sure everybody that has experience in certain areas are brought to the table. I'll give you an example. Soon we'll be calling a press conference. And not to point blame on Norwood and not to make us look bad. But anytime years ago we had the Department of Justice that came into Norwood, and And to have intricate leaders in our community walk away thinking, oh, I heard that that meeting went well. Well, that meeting went well, number one, because the leadership didn't want to actually be transparent and to discuss the difficult issues. Now, these same groups are leading these new action groups. So if you don't want to be transparent then, and nothing's changed, but yet we're supporting these same initiatives, the same individuals, we're going to get the same results. We need new faces, new leaders. I do want to give a few shout outs before I sit down.
Can we wrap up your faster time frame?
With my wife's nonprofit organization, I have 8 emails where these same groups support one another and send out emails asking folks to support. But yet, not one email has gone out for the initiatives that we are a part of. This is what I mean by secret society. But I do want to give a shout out to Mrs. Stevenson, because she did ask about our mental health training, and she did, through her own network, begin to share that information. Andrew Clark, thank you and your family for the Norwood Star and putting that information out. But guys, we've got to support each other more. We've got to support everybody. And if any one person in all of Norwood can prove that I've lied or it doesn't exist, just present it, and I promise I'll publicly apologize. You can reach me at PastorSonnyJames@gmail.com or 513-487-8843, and that would be for the entire city of Norwood. Please, we are doing great work, but there's still more we need to do. I also want to give a shout out to Marilyn Hanrahan, who gave me the time of day to at least listen and to hear my concern. When we say we'll listen to people, we really got to listen, but not have this secret thing behind closed doors where we talk about those that we don't like, and when they're doing good work in this city, they don't get the same support. And if I'm wrong, show me an email where I'm wrong. God bless you guys, and as polite as I can make it.
I'm proud of you. You went over your time, but very politely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stevenson?
I have one question. Can members of council get a copy of this plan?
I've never seen it personally.
Yeah, you mentioned it was about 3 years
I can probably
ago.
look- Search my email.
I will make sure that all of you have that, and I know the city clerk's office has had that plan for years. So
Okay,
if we're
so it's
communicating again to further prove, anyone else can present that, and it would have already been sent out to everybody. But if I send it out, you don't even know that it's there. And it's been here. It hasn't gone anywhere, but some of the same programs that you all support, all you're doing is reduplicating the stuff that's already been suggested.
Pastor James, I'd suggest that if you send it to council@norwood-ohio.com, that's our council email, and ask that it be sent out to all the members of council.
I would do that again.
Yep. And our email addresses are all on the city website, so you're welcome just to put our individual ones in there and to make sure that it gets to us, because I just haven't seen it personally.
Because you responded to one of the emails.
I'll check. I'll look. I mean, a couple years ago.
That'd be my suggestion. You just have to send it out once, and Ms. Hill will
Because
get
we
it
all
out to
want
us.
to work together. We really do. But regarding that police issue, I will be addressing the chief, and we then will be calling a press conference positively to just get more transparency and to address the issues that sometimes go unaddressed. God bless.
Thank you, Pastor James. We have no other requests to address council. Unfinished business. I'm going to start off before you all eventually ask me the questions I'm going to report on anyway. I attended a meeting today of the Ohio Department of Transportation. It was a pre-construction meeting for the Safe Routes to School construction projects that were previously approved. As you may recall, we were approved for two different projects, a combination of $555,320, so over $500,000. A lot of that goes to engineering and the state requirements, but I reported that the bid was awarded to Adlita. They will be starting the project on August the 20th. with various curb cuts and things like that. It is expected that all of the job will be completed by October the 26th. Interestingly, the Ohio Department of Transportation estimated that the bid would come in at about $428,000, and it came in at $505,000, so they were only off by 18.5%. So we are still within our award amount. At the meeting today, I made it very clear to both the contractor and the Ohio Department of Transportation that we have no money above the $555,000, and so any change orders will have to come and be approved personally by Mr. Gears, along with an estimate of the amount of those costs. You know, whenever you open up a street or do curb cuts, some things happen, or when you're dealing with electric. There was initially a change in that some of the overhead lighting or signage of the pulses were now, the Ohio Department of Transportation prefers that those be solar powered, but the cost is about twice as much. And when I asked if the old ones that were in the contract were approved and whether they were acceptable, they said yes. And so we're going to stick with the original plan that was approved. The schools will be notified. We discussed maintaining the roads, maintaining traffic. They will not be permitted to close down any roads. So remember, this is in front of schools, so this is going to be on Carthage Avenue, it's going to be on Williams Avenue, it's going to be on Sherman and Smith Road. So look for that. I would imagine that the majority of the work, as I said, will be completed sometime in September. We had hoped that this would be done during the summer before school, and they are aware of the school's renovations that are going on. So just give you an update on that. Mr. Boswell, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. So the is this for, I have two questions. First one, is this for like both year grant awards that we had received?
Yes. We
Okay.
bid them together because we hoped that we would get a lower cost by having one company do both projects at the same time, and we were given permission to do that. Normally, the second year award would have been done next year, but we were given permission to do them all this year.
Okay, and then the follow-up question is, so I was thinking that both, each year was around like $350,000 to $400,000, so I'd say total like $700,000 to $800,000. Is there other parts of the project that will be bid out later, or just what was the?
No, those other costs were engineering costs and the design of the plans.
Okay.
And so the the award to Adlita is $504,838.55. That was what the lowest and best bid, and that was awarded to Adlita. The remaining money that we have available to us for actual work, the total was little over $555,000. And the other funds that were awarded went for engineering and design plan.
Great, thanks.
Other questions? Ms. Stevenson?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. You shared that schools will be notified of the construction that's taking place.
I spoke to the superintendent today and personally notified her, but there is a requirement that they give them a 10-day notice before any work is done, and so Adlita will be reaching out to them as well.
My question is, could we also get that update to share out when we do meet? My mind is going to residents who maybe don't have a child in the school system, and so maybe through the school would not be notified, as in like mailings going home with children.
So the superintendent and I discussed, she may send out a press release or do something. We're still working on that together. She will, of course, notify the board. There's a Board of Education meeting on Thursday. Unfortunately, I'm not able to attend that, so she will report that out. But she is working through how to notify parents when all this will happen. But there is a requirement that when any work is done on the street, that the Adlita should notify the residents as well. And they are not permitted, just so you know, they are not permitted to turn around in anybody's driveway. They're not allowed to go on anyone else's property. You know, there have been instances in the past where a big old cement truck maybe turned around in somebody's driveway, and then somebody says, "You cracked my driveway," and now the Ohio Department of Transportation is responsible for it. All of those technical things went over. They went over today. It is a federal job. It's with federal money, so there will be paying federal minimum wage. There will be posters with equal employment opportunity posters that have to be met, those goals, since it's a federal project. The hours that are permitted to be worked are 8 a.m. to sunset, including Sundays, but no holidays. And that's by federal law. I do have copies of the schedule if you are interested in it, and some of the subcontractors. I will tell you that the project manager is an African-American woman, and she takes names, and she's going to get it done. She'll get it done on time and quickly, and she warned them, don't even think about a concrete truck showing up without that ODOT sticker on it that they're an approved vendor. So she's going to keep an eye on it. It'll be done well. Yes, Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you. Just to follow up on the notification that the company will do to residents, is that something they're going to mail out?
No, I think they'll do it on the doors.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about this? That was the good part. My next assignment was to get information from Benovation. Deep breath. So I did get a copy of the contract that between the City of Norwood and Benovation for services, and I have that here. It was emailed to me while I was on vacation. Otherwise, I would have, rarely did I have service, I would have forwarded it out to you. So there is a copy here. It is not a signed agreement. It was just taken from the computer. It was given to me by one of the ladies that worked there. But this is the agreement that was signed by the City of Norwood and Benovation. I also have a copy of the reimbursement account claim form that Mr. Schlotman, I wanted to make sure that was it, discussed that he says will expedite forms, will expedite payments. So I will, James, if you want to take these, pass them out, pass them around. That's the good news. The City of Norwood did receive a bill. We sent them the check. I was assured that a couple of, I don't know what, they're passing them all around, that the checks were going to be mailed a couple weeks ago. They weren't mailed a couple weeks ago. They were just mailed this week. Unfortunately, some people received 2016 and 17, and some people didn't. Some people received partial payments. Some people received a payment that had a deduction on it that no one knew why there was a deduction. Dead people received money. A person who has been dead for 17 years received a check 3 weeks ago, or 3 months ago. The wife very honestly returned it. Apparently, a gentleman who died 3 years ago and was notified just recently received 2 checks for $1,000. Those will be returned. I wasn't quite as kind as you, Pastor James, today when I spoke on the phone to Benovation. So we had a spirited discussion, and I received an email back late this afternoon about the number of issues that I became aware of and that Mr. Gatto is aware of. And my guess is that we will have a sit-down meeting to get this resolved, and perhaps have Mr. Schlapman back at a future council meeting, depending on how this all goes. But I will assure you, the mayor referred to me one time as a general, and this general doesn't like to lose, and we will get it resolved one way or the other. Mr. Bonsall had some conversations in my absence, so he probably feels the same way, but today it was very frustrating. And Mr. Gatto said to me yesterday, he called me about 15 times when I was on vacation, so I was aware of the stuff, and he said, I hope you're well rested because the fight has just begun, but we will get it resolved. So that's my report on Benovation. Any questions on that? Yeah, no? Okay, great. Any other unfinished business? Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, we had our committee of the whole a couple weeks ago discussing the market gardens, and we had several representatives from the city, but we also had a representative who was not from the city, Dr. Oldfield, who came, and I would just like to suggest that we send a letter of thanks that was, taking time out of her day to come and share, her knowledge and expertise with us, and I just want her to know that the council appreciates what she did.
Can you take care of that, Mr. Pierce? Yeah, can we get her contact information, Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
We'll take care of that. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. I'd want to follow up also on that topic. So during the discussion today, when the Committee of the Whole report was shared, I was seeking more information about our role. This is the first time in my tenure on council we've received a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and it seems to be counterintuitive in my opinion. And so I was eager to find out if council wants to pursue something other than what was recommended, what are our resources in the city versus seeking out someone like Dr. Oldfield. I do think we should continue discussion. One of the points that was made during Committee of the Whole is that this is it's an opportunity to think more broadly than an individual application. And as a body, I don't think we've had a chance to really talk through implications for zoning. And so I believe you asked, Madam President, if we wanted to bring it up during unfinished. I do. I'm glad Mr. Thompson did. And my ask to council would be that we do meet again, discuss it at a time that is giving everyone enough time to review the document that Dr. Oldfield did share, which was talking about use of vacant properties. We have some, and we've talked in other council meetings about some strategies to get rid of our vacant properties. But what if someone doesn't have a vacant property, but also wants to pursue this concept? I think it's worth our time and attention. So wanted to add that at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Any other unfinished business? Mr. Thompson?
Just, I don't know if this is unfinished business, but it's more of a comment that just kind of came aware of tonight. Tonight we passed 5 ordinances. We suspended the rules on all 5 of them. 4 of them had emergency clauses. I don't think, I know that there are instances when we need to have all 3 readings of our ordinances and we need to have emergency clauses because of timing and such. But I don't feel that we should be governing by suspended rules and emergency ordinance. And especially when I see it at night when we have a total of 15 readings on 5 ordinances. I would just like to encourage us to allow the processes that govern the way that we govern to actually play out. That is by having 3 individual readings, not having emergency clauses if we don't need them. Like I said, I know that there are times that we have to do, and that's why it's okay for us to suggest 3 readings and to have emergency clauses. But I just want us to be cognizant of there are reasons why we should spread out readings over 3 meetings, and that's to give the public time to hear the ordinances, to understand them, and to comment on them if they want to. And I just want us to make more of an effort in the future to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. I have a question based on Mr. Thompson's comment to you, Madam President. Has council in your tenure ever communicated to the administration they'd like more lead time to consider ordinances?
I think we're kind of at the mercy of, as the law department is, they're at the mercy of the administration when it's submitted. My guess is that for instance, this evening, I don't know, perhaps others could have been, some of these could have been submitted earlier. I actually asked for the ordinance promoting the citywide street sale because I thought we had already passed it. The community center, the senior center had asked about it, and I said, we already passed that. I thought we set the dates for both of them. And when I realized that we really hadn't done it, that's the reason for that one. I think if I can certainly let the mayor and Mr. Gears know that if possible, we'd like more lead time. Sometimes that's not always possible when things come up. For instance, my guess is that the lease for the computers for the police department was probably a last-minute thing from Hamilton County, and they need to get that executed. But I can certainly convey that to the administration to give as much lead time as possible. It's not always possible to do.
Thank you.
Mr. Thompson?
Right, and I understand that. I know it's not always possible, and I know that we realize it's not always possible. It just glares at me, though, when I look at a list of ordinances that we didn't do a proper process on, and
I get it.
I feel it's important that we do.
Understand.
Madam President?
Yes, Mr. Moore.
I just want to address the topic in general and the question in your tenure. There have certainly been times over the last 20 years when council members have said, listen, you can't just throw all this stuff at us at the last minute.
Right.
We don't know what it is. We don't understand it. I will say the administration, the law department, we've really, I think, over the last few years, really made an effort to make sure that council has it at least by Friday, so that they have a chance over the weekend to look at it and not have it sitting on your desk on Tuesday night. And if we don't have the text, to at least send out an email to let you know this is going to come. We're still working on it. I will say that there's also a question of philosophy. There are a number of items on tonight's agenda that are not emergencies. The salt bids, that's not an emergency, but it's administrative. It's just one of those things. You do it every year. We grind through it. Council can stretch it out over 3 meetings, but it's really just, we got to file this piece of paper. We got to, council's got to pass it this year. We do salt bid ordinance every year. And so that's just a question of philosophy. You can certainly decide to stretch that out over 3 meetings. There's some of those. Some of them it's not possible to pull all the pieces together. It takes a long time. That tends to happen in development deals, where we are back and forth for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks until we finally get language, and then it comes and there's the state has the economic development grant, so we got to get the paperwork done by this date. Or construction, we have to get it done because we have leases, that kind of thing. And things like the equipment lease for the police department, for the cruisers tonight, that was just way too much paperwork going back and forth, much more than it should have been in any rational world, but we don't live in one. So that's just part of it. That's a big part of it. And yes, I think that it's worth communicating that to the administration and to the departments that request ordinances and resolutions, just, as much lead time as we can, just because sometimes we've got relatively new council members, and things it's like, well, I don't know what this is, I don't know how I feel about it, don't want to vote on it tonight. So it's worth expressing that, but it is an issue that comes up periodically over and over and over again. And sometimes there's things there's just nothing you can do about it. And we've certainly had votes where it's like, I'm not voting. I just saw it tonight for the first time. There's no way I'm voting for this. I don't care what goes wrong. So that's just my 2 cents on the issue.
While it sounds silly in August to have an emergency clause for salt, if you don't get it now, you're probably not going to get it. That happened to us several years ago, and we were scrambling for salt. So, did we know that back in June? Probably, but yeah, but it gets to the point where at some point you are under the gun and need to get it done. You always have the prerogative to only have 1 or 2 readings. I would suggest that you do your homework and make sure, that it's not something that needs to be done right away before you do that. But I will certainly convey that to the administration and ask them to do that to the department heads to give us as much lead time as possible. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. And it's a point that I've heard before. Oh, we rush through these things, but one of the things to think about is that even just between this meeting and our last meeting, there were 5 weeks in between those 2 meetings because we didn't have the July meeting and we didn't have.
Right.
There was a 5th Tuesday in July, so that created another one. So some of these things we would have done at a 2nd July meeting if we could have. But then the other part of it too, and again, is that we only meet every 2 weeks anyways. So if we were to stretch out everything we did for a month and a half at least, then there would be, it just would cause a lot more bureaucracy at the city. And the second thing is, if we do stretch all of these out, we have to advertise all of these. So that's even more money that we give to the Inquirer for the legal advertisings and stuff. So especially for some things that might be a little bit sillier, like the citywide street sale, that's very non-controversial. But the point is made, and I do think though that we need to provide a little bit more transparency. And actually I would like to ask, maybe see what council thinks, but I'd like to ask that our meeting packets be scanned in and provided on the website so that people can see the actual ordinances that we're committing. Maybe have draft put on them or what have you put on them. But I think it would be, the previous clerk of council before I was elected, actually, she would send me meeting packets, just every Friday she would just scan them in and send it to me because she knew I'd be asking for specific ordinances and stuff. So I would recommend that we consider doing that and at least providing the text of these ordinances online so people can have an ability to look at them. Because right now they literally just see the captions and that's it. So I don't know what anybody else thinks about it, but just something I would like to see.
Ms. Stevenson? Thank you, Mr. Bunzel. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. I like that idea as well of having the language, not just the caption, made available for parties that are interested. I think as a next step as it relates to supporting our ability to do homework and know what's going on, I'd like to ask council to consider reiterating to the administration, we really need the cover sheet to know why it's an emergency and have some more context. It's great that we do have these on Fridays, and I appreciate the law department and everybody who helps bring it together. When I read through these, though, if I have questions and there's no cover sheet, I'd start from scratch and trying to figure out, okay, who's the author, where's it coming from, what's the context, and so it limits my ability to prepare. And so I would like to remind ourselves and our administration that is part of our current rules of council, and would like to ask that we consider in our ask back to council to consider, to the administration, excuse me, to consider more lead time to also utilize that practice.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. I'll include that in my letter. Any other unfinished business? Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. A very different topic. At the beginning of August, on the 1st, we had the second Shakespeare in the Park of the season at Upper Mill Crest, and it was a wonderful contemporary version of Romeo and Juliet. I laughed and smiled. My cheeks hurt when I went home, and it was a good time. I was glad the rain held off. I wanted to thank Public Works for their support in getting the lawn ready and having access to the facilities there. I also wanted to give a big thank you to residents. We had a very unique opportunity to bring in a food truck at no cost to the city, and residents showed up and had great meals. The Screaming Goat was the vendor on site and had a wonderful time, and they are interested in coming back to Norwood. So maybe for our next Shakespeare in the Park or other city events, we've got another potential resource for adding more fun to our outdoor activities. So I just wanted to say thank you for those who came out, and of course a huge thank you to the Cincinnati Shakespeare Company.
And I think I got an email that Julius Caesar's going to be at Linderman Park. What, Mr. Thompson, do you have information on
I
that?
was waiting to new business, but I'll do it now. So it's the last Shakespeare of the Park of the season. They're doing 3 productions this year, and they're coming Wednesday, August 22nd to Linder Park, 7 p.m. Again, to do Julius Caesar, Shakespearean tragedy. You don't want to be the title character in a Shakespearean tragedy. We all know how it ends. But it will be fun to see how politicians handled their differences 2,000 years ago.
At Tu Brute.
Exactly. So come out, check it out. Linden Park's beautiful. It's going to be a great place to have it, and look forward to seeing everybody.
I just want to comment. I'm still giggling. There was a little girl that was maybe 9 or 10 years old that was sitting in front of me, and every time Romeo and Juliet would hug each other or something, she would go. It was darling. She was really cute. In the end, she was like, "Oh, why? This is crazy." And we're like, "Well, yeah, it's it's Shakespeare," but it was fun. It was a very good evening. Great weather, and the kids. There were a lot of kids there, and so their reaction was almost as good as the play. So. Any other unfinished business? Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you. I just have one more item. So when we approved minutes today, part of our discussion under unfinished business at our last meeting included the capital improvement plan that parallels our fiscal recovery plan. And I realized in light of our ordinance today about the state program and the local transit program, as well as our infrastructure work that's happening, there seem to be several paths potentially converging. And so I wanted to ask as a point of clarity, is the capital improvement plan that's part of the fiscal recovery plan governing these other projects, or is it something that is just parallel?
There is no capital improvement plan at the present time. That is something that Finance Committee will be working on. Is this correct? Anna Mary and April, and then my understanding is council will have to approve it, then it will go to the Financial Planning and Supervision Commission. But April Davis and Anna Mary Thomas are collecting information, to my knowledge. Mr. Bonsall, can you speak to
I'll
that?
just say, with conjunction with the Parks, Recreation, Streets and Infrastructure Committee, I'll probably be asking Eric for us to have joint meetings when we talk about the capital improvements plan. And if we advertise that appropriately, then we can have meetings together to discuss it. But we have not, I would say the state auditors are not in a rush right now to work on that capital improvements plan. They're not in a rush to, they're working on a review of accounting practices of the city. So it's just a standard thing they have to do for all fiscal emergencies. And Donna's mentioned it, I'm pretty sure, at council before. But they're very much focused on that right now. So, but before we come out of the fiscal emergency, we will have to have a capital improvements plan in place. So I would imagine, yes, you'll hear more about it at some point in the future when the state auditors are ready to start working on it.
Their focus right now is to look at the various departments who have submitted requisitions that have non-sufficient funds, why they've expended their funds already through July, other keys that may be in the red, and as Mr. Bonsall said, there's the big push is we have to have for the state a review of the accounting practices of the city of Norwood. And that's been the major focus the past couple of months. We do have another meeting coming up next week.
Yeah, just a follow-up. I mean, it's not that the city of Norwood can't come up with our own capital improvements plan. I mean, I think what you might have been referencing was the specific state one that they've been mentioning to us before. But yeah, if there is a push that we want to come up with it now, I mean, that's, or try to put a list together, and that's totally fine. It's not that we can't work on it now. It's just that there will be more of an official plan that they will want to see together before we come out of fiscal emergency.
Yes, Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you. That helps create a little more context. I think what was unclear to me is which needs to come first. I think we've been doing a lot of project-based work as we've had money to do that, and not knowing what technically qualifies as the state's capital improvement plan. I just wanted to be mindful that we weren't maybe pursuing some projects that needed to be anchored in other projects. So I think I'll just stay in touch with that team to find out more about what do they require in the plan versus anything we might create ahead of when they get to it.
So I'm just looking, the next meeting is August the 21st at 11:30. That notice will go out from the Clerk of Council's office. Reports of the financial supervisor include the review of the financial reports, the status of report on accounting methods, and update on the dispatch center and retirees health care. So there is no mention of even beginning a capital improvement plan at this time. Their major focus has been on the accounting principles. And I suspect that there will be new policies that will have to be adopted and changes that will take place in accounting. I can guarantee you that will happen as a result of this. Any other unfinished business? Any new business? Mrs. Hanrahan.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to ask...
Can you speak into your microphone?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know, we're all thinking about new revenue sources and missing revenue sources, and I think we're missing one here. I started looking at hotels, and at the present time, we're only at a 3% hotel and lodging tax. And I'd just like to say, I think that is something we should look into. And while I was doing that, I started reviewing, some of our ordinances. And we in Norwood now have several Airbnbs. We're not getting lodging tax for those, and that is like a hotel. I think that needs to be looked at. We don't have any regulations for them. I know there's a house right across over on Carter, and I looked it up, $175 a night. Airbnbs are no longer just rooms, they're also houses. And with that, I think we need to come up with some rules and some ordinances concerning them. I have a friend who has an Airbnb next to him that's a house, and they have many concerns. One of them is groups of people coming in at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning in a residential area. When you look online, or on our ordinances, there are two descriptions for hotels. One's a description and one's, well, anyway, they both, one would cover an Airbnb, one would not. On bed and breakfasts, they're geared just toward people coming into your home. I think this is something I would like to ask if we could put it into law and ordinance. I think it's something we need to look at, because we're only going to get more and more of them. And I think they need to be regulated, as long as I also think it's a missing revenue source for the city. So that's what I would like to ask, if that could be done.
You want both the hotel tax and the Airbnbs in Law and Ordinance Committee?
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah,
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan.
I would actually completely agree with Mrs. Hanrahan. I think the Airbnb tax is something that other municipalities are doing, and Airbnb, for them at least, collects it. So, because I've stayed in Airbnbs in Seattle and Portland, and there was definitely a tax there. So, anything to bring more revenue in, I think, would be a great idea.
I stayed in 3 Airbnbs in the last 10 days. We pay tax on every one of them.
Yes, you do.
So, yes, in Colorado. So they are taxed there. So we'll look into that. Thank you. Any other new business? Mr. Braden?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Madam President. I was contacted by an individual. He's concerned about his area, Lawn and Warren. He seems to think that there's a spike in unsafe activity. He tells me that the stop sign on the corner, that residents are blowing through the stop sign, and he's really concerned about children playing on that corner. And he seems to think there might be some drug activity involved in that. I'm not really sure of that. I just want to make him aware that this is being looked into. I know that Mr. Gears, our Safety Service Director, does know about this, and discussions are being. We're discussing exactly what's, I know when we talk signs and speed bumps, there's other issues involved. There's liability and things like that. So things are being looked at. I just want to mention that. So that the guy that contacted me that knows that we're looking into that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brady. Any other new business? Mrs. Hanrahan?
I'd like to remind everybody that the UC Mobile Health Mammogram Van will be at the Community Center again on Wednesday, September 19th. You can call 584-PINK, like Donna's wearing, 584-PINK to schedule your appointment. And Debbie Simpson from the Community Center wanted to make sure everybody knew that this was not just for the seniors.
Correct.
It's for everyone, and I think that's an important thing to get out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan. Mr. Braden?
Oh, thank you, Madam President. Also, I believe yesterday or the day before, we had 2 young children hit on Carthage Avenue.
I wasn't sure if it was Carthage or Hunter. It was Carthage
I thought it
Avenue?
was Carthage. Carthage and Drex is what I was told. I don't have the information, but I just wanted to send my condolences out, and I'm sure that the rest of the council also would like to send their condolences out to the families and the children, and to hope for their speedy recovery.
So do we know if they're okay? Last I heard, or saw on Facebook anyway, they were taken to Children's Hospital.
Last I heard that the one
unconscious or
child
something.
had a serious injury, but another one was injured, but not severely. So I don't have the details, but I just felt like I need to mention that. We need to address that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mrs. Hanrahan?
I'd like to add to that. We've also got off the plane. I was on vacation, got off a plane, and the first thing that pops on my phone is a shooting in Norwood. Regardless of the situation and what it was, I want to invite anybody who's interested to call me about a Citizen on Patrol program. We've had it in the past. That's how our walkers got started. I have been talking to Chief Kramer about it on and off for a couple of years, And if anybody is interested in getting training and doing that, please email or give me a call. Thank you.
The program still exists, correct? You just need to
does,
expand
it's
it.
just kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. But we want to know, let everybody know. It's not a hard program. Pretty much what you do, you are given a number, so you can anonymously call the police, give them the number, and make complaints. And it's, you do go through a training program that's what we did a couple of years ago. I'm not sure how the chief would have it set up now, but it is a training program, and I'm not sure if we do it or we get sent out.
Thank you, Mr. Sanahan. Mr. Ponsel?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Yeah, I was gonna say, the group is still there, but they go out once a week at this point. They just alternate every...
That's a different group.
It's Citizens on Patrol.
Did I say citizens
Yeah,
on
you said
patrol?
Citizens on Patrol.
Oh, my gosh, I am
That's
so
why I
sorry.
was like
Okay.
confused.
They will
like-
kill me. Helen will be very upset. Community Watch.
Oh.
Community Watch. I am so sorry. Thank you for correcting
Okay.
that. There's a little bit of a difference, but
Yeah.
that's how Citizens on Patrol got started, so.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stevenson?
Yes, I appreciate that acknowledgement, Madam President. I have a question for Councilmember Hanrahan, and then I have a comment about Citizens on Patrol. Can you speak to the difference between the Citizens on Patrol and the Watch?
Sure.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Citizens on Patrol actually go out, walk the neighborhood. You know, they look for things. It might be hazardous things. They may be looking at houses that are vacant to make sure nobody's in there. They're the eyes and the ears that walk around. A lot of the other group, it could be anyone just sitting at home. A lot of seniors do this, or, you know, we're doing it. You just sit at home and you watch your neighborhood. It used to be you could get a little plaque in your window, and if a kid had a problem, they knew they could come to your house. That I don't think that's been developed yet. But that's something else we would be looking at. And that's more reporting crime, where Citizens on Patrol actually go out and look for everything from safety issues to criminal activity. And they're wonderful.
Thank you. Yes. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. And then my comment with Citizens on Patrol, about a week ago, I had a chance to meet the new police chief at Xavier University. He was going on a tour of Norwood, and we met up at Brick, and I got a chance to share a little bit about Citizens on Patrol, and he is interested in walking with the citizens, and so I put him in touch with that group, and so I just want residents to know that group is still active. That's also another resource, and I'm glad to know there's this training program too to make calls as well. So I hope residents become more engaged in the options they have to help keep the city safe too.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Mr. Brady?
Real quick, the only thing that I didn't mention about everything that's been mentioned so far, school starting up. So there's more of a need now that, you know, we really need to pay attention. Not that we don't need to pay attention to it all year, but, you know, our young ones are starting to go back to school, and so stuff like this needs to be addressed. I just wanted to mention that also. Thank you.
A week from today, August the 21st is the first day for Norwood City Schools, so. Mrs. Hanrahan?
I'm going back to this because I made another area. It's block watch. It's just, that's what I couldn't think of it. It was just this block in my brain. It's block watch.
Third time's charm, that's okay.
Block.
Block watch.
Okay, that's embarrassing. I know, more notes.
Thank you. Any other new business? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to communications. The first is a letter from Mayor Williams regarding Mayor's Court report for the month of July.
Dear Madam President and members of council, enclosed, please find the report for Norwood Mayor's Court for the month of July 2018. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. I move that we receive and file the letter.
Seconded by Mr. Brayton. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to emphasize to residents, because I hear sometimes that the city's all about fining people and the city's all about getting, you know, forfeitures and stuff like that. But the city, I mean, our fine revenue is very small, I would say, compared to cities our size and cities with the size of our police department. So, our officers aren't just sitting out there running traffic all the time. I actually don't know why they don't do it more, but it is what it is. We don't, there is occasion, I'll just read the number. It says the number of there was 35 traffic tickets for the whole month, 24 misdemeanors, 4 parkers, I guess that means parking tickets, and 2 stays. And I don't actually know all the stays, what that means, but 35 traffic tickets over the whole month. So just want residents to know that it's not like people are out there to get you. They get very few tickets. Very, very few tickets. So the city barely makes enough money in the revenue to pay for the clerk of court's office, and that's kind of sad. So, but it's not about the revenue, it's about the safety. I'm just saying that I want to emphasize that it's not like we're rolling in dough from fines and stuff like that.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall.
Yep.
Is there any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to receive and file the report. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is the letter that we added from Jerry Stoker regarding the CRA agreement.
This memo is concerning the commercial remodel at the reference property. Mr. DeLuca, owner of the property, has requested a CRA tax exemption for the remodel of his building, for which construction has recently started. However, per ordinance number 18-2009, section 5A, commercial exemptions shall be negotiated in advance of the construction or remodeling occurring according to the rules outlined in Ohio Revised Code, section 3765.671, as stated below. As noted above, Mr. DeLuca has already begun construction prior to obtaining City Council approval for a CRA agreement. Therefore, in accordance with Ordinance 18-2009, as Building Commissioner, I have no authority to process this project for a tax exemption. Ordinance number 81-2009, Section 5A, within the community reinvestment area, the percentage of tax exemption on the increase in the assessed valuation resulting from the improvements to commercial, mixed-use, and industrial real property in the terms of those exemptions shall be negotiated on a case-by-case in advance of construction or remodeling occurring according to the rules outlined in Ohio Revised Section 3735.671. Mixed-use structures where residential, commercial, and/or industrial uses exist shall be considered as solely commercial or industrial uses for the purpose of determining project eligibility and negotiating any exemption, if appropriate, under the City of Norwood Community Reinvestment Area Program. The Building Department is pro-business and pro-development, and I would have no objections to granting a tax exemption for this commercial remodel. However, as stated above, construction has begun. I have no authority to move forward with Mr. DeLuca's tax exemption request. This is a decision for City Council to consider, and if City Council thinks it is the best interest of the city to create a tax exemption agreement with Mr. DeLuca for this commercial remodel, that is Council's prerogative, and I will support that decision. If you have any questions concerning the above, please do not hesitate to contact me, Jerry Stoker, Building Commissioner.
I have spoken to Mr. DeLuca about this, and it is my understanding that his architect sent a letter to the city saying that the only construction that had taken place was pouring of concrete to stabilize footers. And at the time of the application, he had gotten some permits, I think, but I don't think construction, in his opinion, construction had not started. I suggested that he go ahead and apply because the building department wouldn't accept the application. The mayor and I had a discussion and we both agreed that he should go ahead and apply with the letter from his architect stating that the construction that was currently done was to stabilize the footings and then let the process begin. So apparently the process has begun and Mr. Stoker feels that he can't do it. So that I just got this letter this evening, so I asked to be put on the council so we could address it as soon as possible. Mr. Sanker.
Madam President, if question through the chair to the law director, if in the event that council has a meeting and discusses this and says we think they should be allowed to proceed, then paperwork has to be drawn up and an agreement has to be drawn up through the law department and both parties, and then come back to council for council to approve the agreement. Is that how that would work in this case?
It's Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam President. Essentially, there's also another step. It has to be submitted to the Economic Development Committee or Community Development, whatever the name of the committee is, at any given time. That's one of the requirements for it. One of the problems here is that it's not just the ordinance. When this first issue was first raised with us, it was, well, maybe council can waive that requirement, that the agreement's done before construction starts. That would be one thing, and whether or not that's a good idea is a whole nother ball of wax. This is the requirement that's from the statute. So the city doesn't have the authority to grant a CRA tax exemption if construction has already begun. I don't know whether or not the footers, I mean, this is the first I've heard that the footers were not the beginning of construction, we were there to stabilize, so there may be room there to move forward under within the parameters of state law, so it's a possibility. But yes, basically that's the idea, is that there has to be an agreement drawn up and council has to approve it as a contract between the city and the developer. So we've got pretty much a standard form that we would send out and fill. It's kind of, for the most part, it's fill in the blanks. The project's this big, creates this, it's this much money is going to be spent on it, here's the timeline, that kind of thing.
Mr. Sanker?
Follow up. And then that agreement then would be submitted to the Economic Development Committee, and then they would put their recommendation, yay or nay, on it, come back to council to accept, and then the rest of the paperwork then is developed and put forth to move forward with.
We can do, I mean, the paperwork is relatively simple. We can, as far as the agreement, for the most part, for a project like this, it would be pretty simple. If we're talking about, Paycor, the agreement could be a little more detailed, but for a project like this, it's pretty straightforward. Yep. So, I mean, we could do a draft and send it to the Economic Development Committee, community. I apologize, Ms. Stevenson, I can't keep track of the name of the committee. Economic Development, Community Development, what's the name of the committee?
The committee is Economic Development and Community Engagement.
And Community Engagement, thank you. But it would go to that committee and they would review it. But we could do something pretty quick. We'd really need to take a look at whether or not that is whether or not construction has begun already. That would be the real issue.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Moore, if there's questions with the state and how it's written, we can't override the state, can we?
Mr. Moore?
That's correct. If state law says here's the conditions under which you can do it.
So do you then have to go to the state and get it approved, or how do we do this? So
I think the issue that is before us is that the architect sent the letter saying the only construction was to stabilize footing, and that he had tried to apply for the CRA.
I wish Mr. DeLuca would have been here tonight.
He didn't know about it because I didn't know about it.
Okay.
I got this letter. This letter was under your door. It was under the door of the clerk of council's office, and when Mr. Gears came in, he handed it to me. I opened it up, and I made the decision that it was important enough that we act on this right away. So Mr. DeLuca had no idea that this was going to be on the agenda. He probably has not even gotten a copy of this letter, is my guess.
So there would be no issue with the state regardless of what we did?
I think, well, go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Well, issue with the state is because it's not just Norwood's taxes that get abated. That's the thing. It's the county's taxes. It's it's half of it. So we can do up to 49% without the agreement of the school board, but it's everybody's taxes. I mean, half of their tax bill gets cut, and this gets sent in, and it's subject to audit, and I don't know at some point, what would the fallout be? I mean, I suppose it's possible that at some point somebody from the county or the state would say, oh no, this one's no good, and then, I'm sorry, Mr. DeLuca, you're going to have to write a much bigger check this year to make up for, I mean, I don't know exactly what kind of trouble we get into. I have no idea for this kind of thing, but we are not legally authorized to allow a CRA if construction has already begun.
Mr. Braden?
I'm curious, because we're talking giving them to Paycor, and is this considered small business? What is the definition of small business? Is this would be considered small business, or are we talking development?
Mr. Moore?
I'm curious.
I don't know. It depends on which context. Washington has a very different definition of small business than, a small than say what goes in on Montgomery Road for the most part. Small business can be, from Washington, it can be like, oh, we generate revenues of $5 million a year. It can be considered a small business in some perspectives. I mean, it's not Paycor, but this CRA is available for, this tax abatement is available in the city of Norwood for residential property. If you're doing major reconstruction, for new construction, it's available for commercial property. I think you have to spend $75,000 on the development in order to be eligible for the commercial side of the CRA.
Okay.
So from our perspective, the CRA is available no matter how big your business. If you're putting money into a building, real money into a building, then you're essentially eligible for your CRA through the city of Norwood, provided you meet the requirements for the different CRAs available.
And Mrs. Hanrahan, my guess is Mr. DeLuca was watching this because he's now appeared in council, so if you have any questions of him, if anyone does, yeah?
Let's say before we start, yes, I very much would like to hear, but three things I want to note. First, yeah, I would say it's definitely a small business, and I think that what you were trying to get at is that we do these kind of agreements for the large businesses and stuff, like for the Paycors and stuff, so we should be doing them for the small businesses as well. And this has been, maybe it's not as well known, but this has definitely been a part of our code for a bit. So if you're remodeling your residential house, and so your value is going from $150,000 of your house, and now you're going to make it a grand remodel to $300,000. Before you start that, come talk to the building department, because they may have that may qualify for one of these exemptions. And I'd say the same thing for anybody wanting, small business. And so I did pull up the specific section of the Ohio Revised Code, and there's just two parts of the very first section of it that is pretty definitive, but I'm hoping that we can figure this out. So it says, the legislative authority and the owner of the property prior to the commencement of construction or remodeling shall enter into a written agreement. And then later, in that same section, it says, agreements may include terms not prescribed by this section, but such terms shall in no way derogate from the information and statements prescribed by this section. So, it seems like there's some clear-cutness there. So if there is, then that's a concern. But if there isn't, then, if a small business owner didn't file the exemption, I'm sure that Mr. DeLuca probably intended to file it the entire time. So if we can figure out a way, I'd love to do it. But, yeah, it starts.
You want to request Mr. DeLuca to come forward?
Yes, I would.
Would you mind, Mr. DeLuca?
No, not at all.
Again, I was driving up the street about a month ago, and he told me that his architect had said it wasn't construction. So you give him the Reader's Digest version.
This brings back some memories here, but I just happened to be walking by, and I said, let me stop in. It's been a while since I've been up here.
Here's a copy of the letter, Madam.
Thank you. This is the first time I've seen this letter, heard of the letter. Oh, I apologize. He's asking for my name. My name is William DeLuca, 3764 Montgomery Road, Betty's Italian Oven, and the new place that I'm building next door. So this is a copy of the letter that this is the first time I've seen it or heard of it or even knew it was coming out. And quite honestly, I was watching it on cable, and I said, wait a minute. I 5 separate phone calls to Mr. Stoker. 5 times I called him, and he did not return my phone call to initiate the CRA. When I submitted for my application for permits, Mr. Stoker handed me a copy of the ordinance. This was on March the 2nd. It said 2009 City Council passed an ordinance that created a CRA district. If you want to continue, if you want to apply for it, let me know. So throughout the permit process, which took 2.5 months, I might add, to get permits from the city, I called him 5 several times, and he did not return my phone call. And it wasn't until I ran into Mark Reeves, or Kerry Town, it said, Mr. Butch called me and said, your permits are ready, and I ran into Mark Reeves and said, hey, all the subcontractors that I had lined up for this job that were waiting, they had to move on because the economy is so robust, and they're so busy. They have schedules, and they couldn't wait on my project anymore, and so they went onward. And the fellow who was going to shore up the concrete footer, he says, if I can pour the footer in the next 2 days, I'll stay and do it. If not, I have to go. So Mark Reeves came out, approved the footer pour, and at that point I said, Mark, what's going on with Jerry Stoker? He has not returned my phone call. And then so happened the very next day, Jerry called me, and I said, Jerry, I've been trying to get a hold of you, and he simply laughed. And in a very condescending way, in which we had words towards each other. I told him that's not how you run a business, and he simply hung up the phone. He said that I no longer qualified for the CRA district since the footer had been poured. Now, I'm sorry, folks. For the last 12 years, I've kept my mouth shut. I've stayed underneath a rock like most people want me to. That's it. I'm done with it. You want to drive up and down Montgomery Road and see why there's all these empty storefronts? That's your problem.
All right, okay, Mr. DeLuca, let's...
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, let's just stick
There's
to
your
this
problem.
issue. Let's stick to the
That's
issue.
fine. But that's why I'm here tonight. You know, I've invested a tremendous amount of money in this town, and I don't have to. I've been lured. Every city, a Cincinnati politician will come to Cincinnati, will come to Cincinnati, come to Wyoming, come to Madeira, come here. And I said, no, this is my hometown. I live here, I work here, I raise my family here, and I continue to invest in this town. I don't have to. I can go anywhere. I promise you that.
Mr. DeLuca, can you speak to our conversation about the architect?
Well, so as per Ms. Lake, I had a conversation with my architect. I have a letter. I'm trying to gather up all the other documents that I need, but no work has been done. I mean, you folks are more than welcome. You folks, you're not, you understand once you see and you walk through the project, there's no work been done. And I'm sorry, but I'm very passionate. I wear my emotions on my sleeve, and that's because I care. Something's got to be done, but I think I'm entitled to it, and that's about it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Mr. Bonso.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. How much in building department fees have you paid so far?
I don't know the exact number. It's over $1,000. And by the way, the revision ended up costing me an additional $600 over what I don't know. And that's what I'd like to know, is the structure and the makeup of who authorizes or who does the revisions, and that's something that we're looking into.
Yeah, a lot of people would probably like to know that. And the reason why I ask that is that if you cancel the again, that's a lot of money you have to spend, but just something to think about. If you cancel if you were to cancel the project and say that I'm not doing this, I want to refund a 50% or whatever of my building fees, whatever it is, would that then qualify as restarting? I mean, I don't know if you've talked to them about it, but like, is it just basically reapplying for the building permits later, which sucks?
The only way I'd see is that I would have to cancel the building permit fee, go through the building permit process again, pay the additional money, and then start all over. I mean, it's like the dog chasing its tail.
Sure.
And that's just not how you do business.
Sure. And I've heard that in the city of Cincinnati, actually, you can pay an extra fee. And I don't know if this would qualify, but I know like residential stuff qualifies. You can pay a fee to have a building planner like review your thing right then and there. And they can kind of work with them to adjust it or what have you if you need to. So it's unfortunate that we have such a longer period, to review these things. So I think it's something we should definitely look into for that. But
Absolutely. And I apologize for you not knowing it. Mr. Gears gave me the letter tonight before council meeting, and I thought that it was important that we put it on the agenda and address the issue. Mr. Sanker.
Yeah, Madam President, I think what we really need to get would be the details of, whatever the architect letter had, and get that to the folks who to review, so we can kind of move forward on this.
That was submitted to building department, wasn't it?
No, it was not yet.
Oh, I apologize. I thought that was.
No, I have the letter. He was on vacation, and I just received the letter.
So perhaps that would change the contents of this letter. I don't know.
Just follow up.
Yes,
Because I know we've had conversations, and we've had some conversations, but I do think we had that type of documentation, because I don't think, well, as you well know, if we just took a vote on the council right now, say, yeah, give it to them, and all of a sudden we've tripped over something that we haven't seen. But if we make sure that all the documentation is in line, then we can we can move forward. But I think we're not having that. We're kind of jumping ahead. I think we need to get that so we can actually get the process started. So if we get that soon, or rather, not to keep dragging, but rather we submit it to the committee to review, say yes, it does meet, have the chance to make sure that it meets all the qualifications, and then, move forward. So,
Mrs.
whatever
Sander?
there is.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Stanker. Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you, Madam President. I'm sorry you didn't get this. I think it put us all at a disadvantage to get this so late. And it goes back with him, we need more time on a lot of this stuff.
This is just dated yesterday,
I
I'll
know.
just say. But
I know,
yeah.
and this isn't the first time, you've been on council, you've seen it too. But I do want to, are you saying that Mark, I know you've been calling, you're not getting any response, and Mark comes out in the next, you poured the footers, in the next day Jerry Stoker called you?
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
So they weren't dry yet? So they were just poured? Okay.
Yeah, it takes a couple days to dry.
Right.
But, Mr. Stoker did say, well, if I never returned your phone call, that should not have stopped you from moving forward. And, you know what? On the surface, that seems very legitimate. But, the way that I conduct business, if I need something done, I contact the person. If they say they're going to do something, I expect that person to follow through. And if you're not going to follow through, please let me know.
Thank you.
Mr. Thompson?
I'm just curious how much time passed between when you first attempted to get the tax abatement, made that phone call, or got that process going, that first phone call of 5 till you were told that you had already started construction and it couldn't be done.
Can you hear him?
Yeah, I think he's asking how long of a period went by before.
Yeah, from the first contact to...
Sure, well, that was March the 2nd. It took about, I'd say about 3 months.
So 5 calls over 3 months.
5 calls over 2.5 months.
Over 2.5 months.
And then quite honestly, I had a face-to-face with Mr. Stoker here at your last committee, the whole meeting, and that's where we kind of hashed it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty unacceptable way for a city to do business with potential small, large, anybody business owners. I don't appreciate that we have city employees who treat our business owners in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Braden?
Thank you, Madam President. Can you have that all designed and figured out now? Can you give us an overview of exactly what you got going on?
Sure, it's going to be a sports bar with barbecue. It's going to be tied into betas, where you can go from betas to the patio to the barbecue place, and it's all going to be like one big area.
I just seen this tonight, as well as everyone else. We all got this at the same time. I've seen his projects. I've seen your projects. Top notch. So I would be willing to bet that if you save money on this, you pour it right back into the project. I've seen them. They're top notch. I mean, we're not talking about some guy that wants to buy something and slap some paint on. We're talking a development that's going to improve that corner. I've seen his projects, and he's not joking.
Mr. Moore, just to clarify, this has to go to the Economic Development and Community Engagement Committee?
Correct.
No matter,
The application and the terms of the agreement go to and I believe, I don't have it in front of me, but it goes to, it's an odd thing that it gets referred to the Economic Development Committee and then moves on from there. But it's got to go to them at some point, which is unusual, but I'm not sure why we set that up, but that was in the way we drafted the ordinance. So, but I mean, if we've got the application and that's a place to start.
and you can get us the letter from the architect. And I would suggest that you place this into the economic development. Do you have a committee date set, Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, we do. Our next committee meeting will be September 6th at 7 p.m.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
I have a question for Mr. DeLuca. I spoke with you earlier before you ever started the project because I had residents call me concerned with parking. And when I spoke with you, I was under the understanding that this was going to be more of a breakfast place because you didn't want to compete with yourself. Because the concern was, I know you're putting a patio out. What are you going to be doing about the parking? I know you're very successful. Your parking lot is filled all the time. So can I ask, what are your plans for the parking for a whole new business?
Fortunately, City Council a couple years ago passed an ordinance that did away with parking requirements. I believe you were on council at the time.
For Montgomery.
What I'm doing is I'm creating...
It was before us, but...
It was before me, yeah.
Well, I apologize. I'm creating a breezeway where folks can utilize the existing parking and cut through the back to get this establishment. Also, there's parking along Clinton Avenue in front of the business that's on the property. And then there's plenty of parking on Montgomery Road that's metered. There's additional parking on Lexington that's metered. It is what it is, where we can't let things like that stop development. We have to move forward. We have to give people a reason to come to Norwood, invest in Norwood, look at Norwood and say, hey, you can do business there and you can make money and everyone can be happy.
I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. I mean, it wasn't the understanding I had when I originally talked to you, though, and that's why I wanted to ask.
Sure, 2 years ago it was going to be a brewery. I mean, things change. You've got to go with what the demand is and where and what's hot and what's new and where you can fill that niche. I'd love to have a breakfast place. There used to be a breakfast place there that I went to every morning. But the demand isn't calling for it right now.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to make a request of the clerk's office as it relates to this being referred to economic development and community engagement. Could we have copies of Ordinance 81 in the year 2009 sent to members of the committee in advance of our September 6th meeting, as well
I think
as...
it's actually 18. I think there's a typo. I think it's Ordinance 18, 2009. It says 18 in one part, and then it says 81 in the other. I'm pretty sure it's Ordinance 18.
Thank you. Could we have copies of the appropriate ordinance sent to committee members?
I can pull that after the meeting.
Could you send that to every councilman? Yeah. So we all have it?
I'd like to request that you send it to the committee beforehand. All council members would benefit from a copy. I also like to ask that the text of that revised code 3735.671 be sent out to the committee members as well.
And may I assume that you will add this to your agenda for
Yes.
September the 6th?
Yes. Do we need to make a motion?
Probably a very good idea. Mrs. Hanrahan?
I would like to ask that the same thing be sent to all council people. Thank you. Or the same information she's requesting, I'm asking it be sent to all council people.
Okay, thank you.
Members.
Mr. Saker?
To move forward, we need to vote to receive and file and place it in the committee.
Correct.
With that added to their agenda so that it definitely is covered, and the architect's information that you have as well, or if Donna has that, or whenever, that should be there too. So I would like to make a motion that we receive and file the letter and the matter be placed in Economic Development and Everything Else Committee, and to be added to their September 6th, I believe, agenda. And the appropriate documentation be forwarded to them as well prior to.
Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Glad we're at least moving forward on this.
Can I say one more thing? And
Certainly.
I'm not asking for any, I don't want any favors. I'm not asking for any whatever. I just want what any person could get. That's it. That's all I'm asking for. And I think that Norwood as a whole will benefit from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. DeLuca. The motion on the floor is to receive and file the letter to place the matter into the Economic Development Committee, that documentation be sent to all committee members as well as all members of council for consideration. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from Co-working Cincinnati LLC DBA Fueled Collective regarding Trex liquor transfer.
Hello, Jerry. My name is Drew Chalfant, and I am writing today to discuss our Co-working Cincinnati LLC DBA Fueled Collective intention to expand the operations of the Fueled Collective Norwood location to add an additional second-floor premises in the Rookwood Exchange building. If you are unfamiliar with the Fueled Collective concept, it is a membership-based co-working facility by day, which doubles as a social club / lounge and rentable venue space for businesses and social functions on evenings and weekends. Our flagship location opened on the first floor of the Rookwood Exchange building in February of this year, and it has added significantly to the vibrancy and economic vitality of the complex and surrounding areas. www.fueledcollective.com. My colleague Christian Kit Higgs spoke with you last week about our desire to initiate the Trex transfer process to move a liquor license into the city of Norwood for use at the new second floor expansion. I have included here the Trex transfer form for your and council's review. We are respectfully requesting the city of Norwood to approve a transfer of this liquor license into Norwood by completing Section B of the attached Trex transfer form, Co-working Cincinnati 08-06-2018.pdf. I have also included some artist renderings of the planned second floor build-out, which you'll see are in line with the current first floor operations we have underway. As with the first floor location, we believe the second floor location will add economic, cultural, and recognition value to the city and surrounding areas by drawing local and non-local employees, co-working members, and social function attendees. If there is a council meeting tomorrow evening, please advise if it would be helpful and appropriate to come discuss this matter with council in person, and I am more than happy to do so. I am of course available by phone to discuss further as well. Thank you, Drew Chalfant, General Counsel, Fueled Collective Franchising, LLC.
Which pleasure. Ms. Stevenson?
I move that we receive and file the letter.
Seconded by Mr. Breeden. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Hanahan?
Thank you, Madam President. I believe we gave this company this Trex license 4 years ago. And I have questions about, I believe Trex license devalues the license we already have in Norwood. And I want to know if there are any Norwood license right now available for purchase. Does anybody know that?
From the state of Ohio, or are you talking about from a private seller that wants to sell?
The private seller, because all our licenses are already used.
I have no idea. Do you know, Mr. Moore?
And if I could have
the Sherman Market one or not.
I'm sorry, can't hear you.
Sherman Market, I don't know if that one's been sold or not. I know they were trying to sell it.
Okay.
And if I can have a follow-up, I would like to ask Mr. Moore, if you get a Trex license, and that business, can that business then sell that license if they move out? Or how does that work? Will they be able to sell it, or if the business, say, goes out of business, will that just go with it? Is it treated the same as a regular license?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Okay.
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. The form that was included says the seller is the Esquire Theater LTD. I think it could be worthwhile to maybe reach out to the Department of Commerce and get better understanding of the questions raised about the types of licenses and availability. I know that we've had these types of requests before, but I don't think council's ever been provided with a running list of what types are in use in our municipality. Not sure if that's something that the clerk's office would have on hand, that they could provide us with. I did have a question, and I'm not sure who might know the answer, but when Field Collective was designed and of course opened, was there any, at that time, discussion with council or administration about businesses registering as Norwood businesses? I know that this document lists they are residing in Norwood, Ohio. I'm just curious if that's a requirement that is currently in place?
I don't know, Mr. Moore, are you aware?
On that, yes, Your Honor. Sorry, Your Honor. Madam President.
Okay.
When Fuel Collective applied for a Trex transfer for the first floor facility, we went back and forth with them about the signage, about the logo, because I think it was Fuel Hyde Park or something like that, or something that we were, no, you're gonna have to change that. It's not gonna be Hyde Park, it's gonna be Norwood. And we kind of settled on Rookwood, and they changed all of their marketing materials to take off the non-Norwood references. And so we can do that. We can say, listen, this is what we want before we're willing to sign this. So, yeah, and I'll tell you, the last time I went ahead and signed, we went back and forth, the administration, I consulted with council, and I ended up signing, the law director could sign a Trex transfer, and I went ahead and signed it because everybody seemed okay with it. But after that, I had some members of council say, don't do that anymore, so I just sent it to you guys figure it out. So.
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, I'm kind of, my head's kind of where Maryland's is at, and I don't have a problem doing a liquor transfer, but I want to make sure that due diligence was done in attempting to purchase one that is already available from within our city. I totally agree. You bring in liquor licenses and you dilute the value of the ones that are already here. Those are valuable assets to the people who have them, and they may be interested. What I don't want to see happen is a company go to purchase a liquor license at a cheaper price from outside the city to then just bring it in if there was one available. I want to make sure that we can confirm that before we move forward with any of this.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Sanko?
Madam President, a couple things. One, Trex license can only be transferred in if it's for an economic development project. It can't be transferred in, to a neighborhood pony keg just because that's really not an economic development project. That would be over there. However, it also says that the only quota requirement that must be met in order to Trex transfer permit classes is the location where the permit is being transferred to must not have any available permits or a quota of permits available with applicants on the waiting list exceeds the number of openings. So it may not be right to assume that they did their homework, but I would assume that possibly they went and looked and found that there were none. I'm not answering for them, but I'm just saying that that's what it states in the Trex application process. So if, unless they're all accounted for and not available, then that would, but technically they should have checked that in advance, whether they did or not. We don't know.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Sanker. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Moore commented that in the past, when the discussions were happening, there were some agreements made. I'm wondering if we could be provided of what the final agreement was, to have that in consideration of this new request as well.
Mr. Moore?
We don't have a written agreement. They submitted their revised marketing materials, and the administration and I thought, oh, that's much better. And I can't remember if I shared that with council or not at the time.
I think you did.
I think I did. Mm-hmm. And so everybody said, oh, that looks much better. We didn't have a written agreement. It was just, we're not signing this until, if it's going to say Hyde Park, we're not signing it. It's kind of where we were on that. And so I will say, for those that are the Ohio Department of Liquor Control has a huge, I at one point printed out a whole lot of it. I didn't bring it with me, on Trex, you can, on what all the different permits are, what the qualifications are. You can check the current availability in any particular jurisdiction to see which ones are available, how many are have been taken up, how many are on the waiting list, and that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing. Ohio Department of Liquor Control's got it on their website. It's a huge amount of information, and I'm sure everybody can get all of their questions, all the questions they possibly have answered, other than whether fuel actually offered betas or the mounds, how much they offered them to buy their licenses. So,
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Bonso?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. And, I mean, this project itself, I mean, it seems like a project. I mean, it says here the total amount invested in the project, $2.5 million. It says the number of jobs that will be created, 12. The estimated tax revenue, payroll tax, $20,000, property tax, $15,000, sales tax, $75,000, state withholding tax, $20,000. It's not a project where, it's not like we're competing with other, this project is not going to have, they're not going to be competing with other restaurants in the area. So it's not like they're going to go right up against, the Capitol Grill or what have you, all these other places that have a liquor license that, had to buy it. I mean, it's an accessory use to the co-working space, that they're going to sell alcohol for their kind of event functions or what have you. I personally, I think these are all, I guess, good questions. I don't want to see the city of Norwood artificially inflate the cost of liquor licenses in our city that might prevent future people from opening restaurants or from doing things, because we don't want to, I guess, approve the Trex transfer for an economic development project. And so I just want to be careful that we're not thinking of that in our head, because I don't know if it's this council's role to ensure that the price of a liquor license in a private transfer, remains $40,000, forever and ever. And I don't know what it is now. I actually would be curious to hear from the applicant to find out if they did reach out to anybody here and what they were told of the price that people would sell for. Because for me, it's like the liquor licenses here, I think, are almost all probably used by current businesses. The bars that I can think of around, they're all operating. And so a liquor license is not just selling of the liquor license, it's basically selling your business, because you can't continue to operate. And I'm sure everybody has a price. I'm sure Mr. DeLuca has a price for Betta's for what he would sell that liquor license for. I don't know, $200,000, whatever it is. To lose, because basically he would lose the ability to sell alcohol there. Everybody has a price. But we just want to make sure that, I just don't want us to artificially inflate it if it's so much higher than what somebody could get elsewhere through a Trex transfer. That's just my concern.
Thank you, Mr. Bonso. Mrs. Hanrahan?
I can comment to that. Thank you. I understand where you're going, but I'd like to say just the fact that you state it's a $2 million project, I think that makes it even more offensive to the small business owner who doesn't have that kind of money to work with, and they had to wait in line for their liquor license and pay $30,000 for it. So I think there's two ways of looking at that. I don't want to stop business. I want to see. But I think we also have to look at how many liquor licenses do we already have in Norwood. Norwood had, years ago, you were here, there was a bar on every corner, and it didn't do Norwood well. So I think, there are reasons I think we should keep tabs on how many liquor licenses we have and how we get them, or how those people get them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan. Mr. Sanko?
Yes, Madam President. I know the motion was on the floor to
just receive
and file. However, I do think, along with that, we either need to send a letter to Mr. Stoker that council's action was to receive and file the letter. No action was taken either to approve or disapprove a Trex license pending additional information being requested. And I guess that would be one. What happens to the Trex license if this business happens to go under? At one time I was under the impression, maybe wrong, that the Trex license, once it comes into it, it has to be in the economic development area, but that it has to stay in that economic development area as part of the Trex process. It's not like a standard liquor license. And then also if there's other ones available. And so I think those would be something we would respond back to him so we can get back to these people so that they aren't standing sitting idle. So if we had a motion and a second, we may want to see possibly amending that so that there is some communication back to them as to what they need to do next.
Thank you, Mr. Sanker. I agree, either communication or placed in a committee or something for further review. So, Ms. Stevenson, it was your motion and Mr. Braden your second. So, Ms. Stevenson, you want to reconsider or add to your motion?
I'm happy to reconsider. I guess a question I would have based on Mr. Sanger's comments is, would we want the answers from the letter to Mr. Stoker to come back to us for further consideration to just a regular meeting, or would we want that to go to a committee? Did Mr. Sanker have a preference, would be my question before considering my amended motion.
Mr. Sanker?
I don't have a preference. I mean, if it'd get further review in committee, that's fine, but still those questions I think would need to be asked of Mr. Stoker for review.
Mr. Clark?
Thank you, Madam President. I would personally like to see it go into a committee. I think both council members have raised great points, and there's two ways to look at this, and I think it warrants some discussion on how future applications like this, how we're going to consider those. I would like some consistency, but I kind of torn here. I can see both ways how you both are looking at it, so I think it warrants some discussion in my opinion, so I would like to see it go into committee.
And again, you can do both. This was dated on the 7th. Unfortunately, we didn't get it till Friday, and I apologize. I was out of town and didn't get back in town, or otherwise I may have, perhaps we should have contacted them and had them come to this meeting. But I think at least if we place it in the committee and write them a letter asking that they come to the committee meeting and explain, we may get this resolved or come to the next council meeting. They did offer, if it's helpful and appropriate, to come to discuss the matter with council in person. I think they offered that, and I think we need to take them up on that. I don't want that point to be lost. It was not followed up by our city to do that. Mrs. Hanrahan.
Can I suggest to be put in the committee of the whole?
If you want to. There's already an economic development committee meeting scheduled. It may be, whatever your preference is. It's less, yes, Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, I think the concern of putting in the economic development committee, which I am a part of, but is that there's quite a bit of stuff in there right now already, and so I don't even think, it sounds like it looks like the chairperson would rather it not be in the economic development committee. So we've already got to meet again, I think, at some point to have a follow-up discussion on community gardens or the market gardens. So I would think that putting it in committee of the whole and hopefully scheduling a meeting in the next 2 to 3 weeks might be able to happen.
Yes, Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam President. I do think it warrants more discussion. I think that committee of the whole would be most appropriate. We do have a full agenda already for September 6th with economic development and community engagement. And I think to echo Mr. Clark's point, I think it's good to think about our point of view as a body, since we all would eventually be voting on this. So I would gladly amend my motion to include the correspondence to Mr. Stoker, to include a request that this...
If you want to place it in committee of the whole, I will contact Mr. Chalfant and set up a time that might be appropriate for him and the law department and members of council. I'm more than happy to do that if you want to just put that onus on me.
I would love to put that in my motion, as well as receiving and filing the letter.
And Mr. Braden, will you amend your second?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks.
So the motion on the floor then is to receive and file the letter, to place in the committee of the whole, and have the president of council write a letter to Mr. Stoker asking those questions about the Trex license and the process that's involved. Is that fair statement of what you want done? Yes, Mr. Bonsall.
I'd also like to get a list, if it's available, maybe we already have it, but of all the liquor licenses that would be, or the alcohol licenses that are in the city, if we can get that, if the clerk might be able to call the alcohol board and find that out.
We should already have that. I think they sent that out first.
Don't
Okay.
have that.
So if we have that, that's great, then I'll,
They should have
Send a letter because we can object to them once a year. They send out a letter out once a year.
yeah, I wouldn't mind, yeah, just knowing the licenses that are out there and seeing if there's any that are for a business that's no longer operating.
Will you take care of that? Okay, any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is to receive and file the letter, to place the matter in the committee of the whole, have the president of the council contact Mr. Chalfant to set up the meeting, send a letter to Mr. Stoker asking questions for the trucks licenses, if it moves those questions that you had and the process that is involved, and that Mr. Gears will get us a list of all license holders within the city of Norwood. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Wait
Yes.
to see these minutes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We have no absent members. Mr. Breeden,
Motion to adjourn.
seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Didn't we have the finance committee report on
Yes.
there? You're missing the finance committee.
We did that.
We
Why
did
did
it.
I have that in? It's my
We did
mind,
it.
isn't it?
You're good.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.